I will just excuse myself for a quick minute. Sorry for that. Okay, I'm back.
All right, now I will admit the participants.
Okay.
All right, we may begin, Dr. Fa.
Okay, thank you, Aido. Hello, welcome everyone, and warm greetings from the Traces Laboratory here at the Areté in Ateneo de Manila University. Now, this is the first of a series of webinars that will present current research and new discoveries in archaeology and paleoecology. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Rebekka Volmer, who will give the opening talk of this webinar series and share her research with us. Dr. Volmer is a good friend and longtime colleague, and we have been collaborating in several projects on the earliest history of the Philippines and its paleobiogeography. She is currently a scientist at the Senckenberg Research Institute and Museum in Frankfurt, and a recipient of the prestigious Gerda Henkel Foundation Research Fellowship, where she is investigating the cultural diversity in Southeast Asia's early prehistory. Dr. Volmer is a paleobiologist by profession and studies the ecological role of humans and hominins in their habitats and the challenges they had to cope with. In her doctoral thesis, she studied the interactions between hominins and carnivores, and afterwards expanded her research focus to include hominin-prey interactions in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. Her expertise also includes agent-based modeling of competition between predators and early Homo sapiens. She has successfully led several research projects during her stay at the University of the Philippines, where she was the head of its Archaeology laboratory and headed archaeological excavations in Cabaruyan Island, Luzon. On behalf of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology and the Anthropological and Sociological initiatives of the Ateneo, I would like to thank the people and institutions that made this webinar series possible. Dr. Joel Kanudai and the members of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, the School of Social Sciences, the Office of the Vice President for University and Global Relations, Areté, the Creativity and Innovation Hub of the Ateneo de Manila University, Eduardo J. Aboitis Sandbox Zone, Kalipunang Sociologia, Anthropologia, and without further ado, I will now hand over to Dr. Rebekka Volmer and her talk on the significance of the evolution and dispersal of Philippine fauna. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alfred, for this very kind introduction, and also thank you very much to all your colleagues who made it possible to host this webinar. And of course, thank you very much for inviting me to be the first speaker. I think you said that we are opening this series, and I selected, of course, the significance of the Philippine fauna for this topic to give, actually an overview about the recent finds in Philippine archaeology, especially in relation to the fauna. And I think I can start now with the slide. So let me see if I can, that looks good. Okay, so I said already that the Philippine fauna, it's actually, or the evolution, let's say, it's a bit still understudied, I would say. But it's also very important for the Southeast Asian biogeography, and this is mainly what the talk is about. Let me start. You already said that I was heading the Zoo Archaeology laboratory in UP before, and a lot of people are not very familiar with what is actually zoo archaeology and how is it different from paleontology. The zoo archaeology in general is studying bones from archaeological sites. So this is mainly kitchen remains or other remains of domestic animals or hunted animals, while paleontology is mostly studying actually how animals have evolved. So it's in general about skeletons or animals and fossils that can be found. And of course, we have a high overlap between zoo archaeology and paleontology, because there are time periods where humans have lived, and they are also relevant to paleontology and the evolution, because there was interaction between animals and humans. In general, of course, zoo archaeology is very important for understanding culture. Of course, animals play an important role in our food, such as coffee, and of course as a source for protein, vitamins, and fat. And of course, our food is also our culture, or a big part of our culture. And in this way, zoo archaeology or the animal remains can be actually very significant for an archaeologist. Animals, of course, also play a role in archaeology or our culture for use. For example, of course, we use them for farming to better make a use of the environment and the resources in the environment. They can, of course, be used as, for example, a guarding dog, so they can help us in our safety. They might be even significant in the dispersal of humans. For example, colder regions will not be able to reach without hunting animals and using their skin to protect against the cold. Of course, in the tropics, it's less important to have fur or leather, but it can also be used for some, of course, clothing. And of course, last but not least, animals can be part of our culture. They can be our friends, so of course we love them as pets, but they can also be part of cultural events. Of course, also here in this way, a cockfight is also something where we use them in a cultural way. And that's why we cannot leave out animals in archaeology. So in general, of course, I'm more from the paleontological part, and this is mainly, I'm interested in everything from the Pleistocene, which is about 2.5 million years ago, until the Holocene started. And this is a time period where we have an overlap between zoo archaeology and paleontology. I'm not sure how familiar the participants are with the Pleistocene in the Philippines, but I just give first a short overview about what actually can be found in the Philippines during that time period. There were, of course, elephants present in the Philippines. There are several finds, especially from Luzon in the northern area, in Cagayan, Kalinga, and also in Anda, Pangasinan. There are also stegodon remains. Probably the Philippines had their own species of stegodon. There can be in several sites also in Antipolo, so very close to Manila. Stegodon fossils can be found, and I think there are not only in the National Museum but also in NIX in the Geological Institution. There's also a small museum where some of the bones are displayed, and there are even bones found in Mindanao from stegodon. Of course, we also have a rhinoceros. This is a very significant and famous find. I will also talk a bit about that later. And then we also have a pig species, Syllaboceros, which is also very important, and we'll talk about that also a bit later, because this is a very unique genus. So it's an extinct species, and it's also actually endemic for Southeast Asia, and it doesn't exist in the mainland. We also have some turtles' bones. I unfortunately don't have pictures of them, but there was also a giant tortoise present in the Pleistocene. And of course, we also have bones of bovids. Bovids in general, or bubalos, is very interesting for the Philippines because we have, of course, in Mindoro, the tamarau. There's a picture of the tamarau. There used to be also an endemic species for Cebu, which was called the Cebu tamarau, but it is a separate species, so they are not the same species. And we also have bovid bones here from Luzon, but we don't know yet which kind of species they are. Okay, so how did they come here? Because I mean, the question is, we have, of course, the Philippines as an archipelago. In general, of course, we have Southeast Asia in the form of islands. So the question is always, how did animals come to these islands? And of course, one way is the swimming. And you can see that there are some species who are able and who do cross the sea to reach other islands or continents. This is especially the case for deer. It's also known for pigs, elephants, and of course also rats can swim. We don't know how long the distances are. But another way of reaching islands is, of course, that in the Pleistocene we had lower sea levels. So you can see here the surface of the so-called Sunda Shelf. So when the sea level was low during the Pleistocene, animals were also possible to come into Southeast Asia through land bridges. It's not yet clear if the Palawan Island was also connected to Borneo. Some reconstructions say there was a connection. Others say there was no connection. But some of the islands of the Philippines were never really connected to this Sunda Shelf, even if it was exposed. So just shortly, of course, I think there was one of the questions we also had about dispersal and expansion. There are, of course, different processes how a species can distribute. And sometimes we have the idea that animals are, let's say, willingly going into another area. And this can, in fact, happen. That, for example, if a species is living in an area and the resources are scarce, they can try to find ways to move into, actively move into a new area. But we also have the so-called range expansion. And this is something which is very easy to imagine that, if species is successful and it's reproducing, then the population is growing, and then the population needs more area and range. So there's an automatic expansion in the range, and then there's a distribution occurring. Less relevant is biotic dispersal. You can find sometimes when, for example, parasites are transported with bird feathers. But of course, we also will talk a bit about this geodispersal. Of course, this one is not so much relevant with the recurrence. Extinction we also have, of course. But coming back to the way how animals were coming into Southeast Asia and the Philippines, we already said, there could be a corridor, especially for Java, Sumatra, and Borneo, and the Sunda Shelf was exposed. And in this way, of course, animals can easily move into the area. But there are also other ways of forming a fauna, and there can be, which is called a filter bridge. Maybe there were short distances of water which could be overcome by good swimming species. Or, for example, if you have a habitat that can be conquered by one species but not by another one, you have so-called a filter, and only a few species can move into a new habitat, but not all. And then in the last scenario, there is the so-called sweepstake route. And this is kind of crazy because it means that the islands are so far in distance that animals can only go there by accident, for example, by tsunami catastrophes. A few animals can be floated over and colonize an island, which is actually very remote. And in fact, this actually happens sometimes, and we also have this especially in Southeast Asia. And very important or very significant for remote island faunas is that we can see that large animals dwarf in size. So we can find then elephants of the sizes of ponies. This is, for example, in Sicily the case. Interestingly, then small mammals tend to increase in size. They form giantism, so that, for example, a rabbit can increase its size into this weird creature. So you can see here the comparison of a normal rabbit and a giant rabbit from, I think this is also from an Italian island. And another very significant thing about a remote island fauna is that carnivores like tigers or wolves are completely absent, but they are often replaced by reptilian predators such as the Komodo dragon. And usually reptilian predators cannot occupy, or they cannot compete with mammalian predators. But of course, if they are absent, they still have the opportunity to occupy this niche. And of course, we can find several faunal compositions, and here I selected an overview from about the 700,000 Middle Pleistocene age. And we have here from Luzon, we can say we have here the stegodon, we have a rhinoceros, we have a deer, we have the Syllabocuros, we have tortoise, and we also have a varanus. But for example, if we go to Sulawesi, we have a bit less species. We have here 2 stegodon, but we have also the tortoise and the Syllabocuros, but only a red, so there are no deer and especially also no rhinoceros present. And the same for Flores is that here we also have a very poor island species. It's actually very remote island fauna with dwarfed stegodon and the Komodo dragon and the giant rat. And interestingly, we also have here a very small hominin, the floresiensis hominin. But for example, in Trinil, this is for Java, for here, we found a variety of species. So there must have been an influence from the mainland, probably animals were walking into the island. And this can also be seen that we have, for example, a poor swimming cat, which is a leopard cat, and also a carnivore, and tigers, they can swim, but probably not very far. And as you probably remember, I said that carnivores are actually not typical for remote islands fauna. So we can assume that here must have been somehow a corridor or at least a filter allowing animals to come in, while here we have a typical island fauna. But what about Sulawesi and Luzon? Actually here we don't see it that much of an island fauna, especially in case of Luzon, because the rhinoceros is actually not really part of island fauna. We also don't have so much the dwarfism, while in Sulawesi, I think one of the stegodons which are found there is dwarfed. So there was probably also a bit of an influence that we don't, or we cannot really talk about a remote island fauna. Okay, yeah, so where did they come from? Of course, I already mentioned that there was a possibility to come into Southeast Asia via land bridges, and we can find similar animals here in India, but also in China. And so it used to say that there are the Sino-Malayan route coming down from here, from China, or the Siva-Malayan route, because in the so-called Sivalix hills in Pakistan, in the Indian subcontinent, very similar species were found like in Java, because Java is actually one of the very well studied paleontological and archaeological area in Southeast Asia. They already started in 1899. And so we can say, okay, if we have similar fauna in these areas and we have the land bridges, it's much likely that they used either one or both of these routes. But of course, new finds were discovered, and now this Pseudobuceros pig comes actually on stage. And the interesting part is, I said, this is a genus which is only present here from the islands. We only know it. It was first discovered actually in Sulawesi. And then later on, Dr. Thomas Inguifo and Noel Amano, they both discovered more of this pig. But here in the Philippines, it is a separate species, but it's also the same genus. So there must be somehow a relation between the Sulawesi and the Philippines. And first, of course, it was also thought that maybe it was coming also from the mainland and it was never found here, and maybe it walked into Sulawesi and then it came up to the Philippines. But this is actually very unlikely, because if you see here the red arrows, they are showing a bit of the sea currents. I haven't displayed all the sea currents, but in general, they are more coming down here than coming up. So it's very unlikely that the pig has come or dispersed from here up into the Philippines. It's more likely that the origin, or maybe the endemism even, formed here in Luzon, and then the pig dispersed down here into Sulawesi. And interestingly, the pig is not the only animal where we can see something like that. There's also the deer. And in case of the deer, I have here the species distribution from today. So we have the Indian Zamba. This is a large deer, or Rusa species, which can be found here on the continent. And it's also present here in Sumatra. It was also present in Borneo, but I think it's extinct there now. But here we also have a different species, which is called Rusa timorensis. And this one is present in Timor and also in Java. So it was already a bit of a question, why is it the case that the Zamba could move into Sumatra and Borneo, but haven't reached here into Java? Of course, there was also the theory that maybe the endemism was shaped here in Java and then it was distributed here to Timor. But of course, it could have also been the case that Timor deer was already here. So when the Zamba came and moved here, they couldn't occupy, because here the niche of this deer species was already occupied. So they were not able to distribute into Java and Timor. Interestingly, when we study deer bones from Luzon, this one is from Kalau Cave, and we can see this is a metacarpal. It's a part of this leg of the deer. And if we compare it to other species, we can say also here Alfredi, this is a Philippine species, it's a Visayan spotted deer, and Marianos, this is the Luzon deer, and we have the Timor here, and of course the Zamba. Then we can say it's in its shape, it's different to all of them, so it's probably a separate species. We can also see here the measurements compared to other Asian deer species. This is also from this metatarsal. And you can see here, these are the two specimens from Kalau Cave, and they are actually plotting for themselves. So they are not clustering into one of the other deer species. Interestingly, also, if we take a look on this Timor deer, we can say it is in fact one of the closest to that one. So this would also a bit support that theory that maybe, or maybe I can go back to one of these slides, yeah, that maybe this Luzon deer or the deer remains we can find in Luzon are more related to this Timor deer, and that there was in fact, as I stated here, and this theory is a bit of a new one, that animals came in fact from China, but they might have used Taiwan and the Philippines as a stepping stone into Southeast Asia, and that we have actually a third route, not only here from India and China through this Sunda Shelf, but also here via Taiwan, and that there is, of course, in this case, always a land crossing necessary. But once, of course, a species is occupying a niche, invasion from this side wouldn't have been possible. And so we have actually a unique shape or unique faunas that we can find in the Philippines, but also Southeast Asian islands. Okay. So I think I still have a bit of time, so I can say, why are they not here anymore? I mean, all these large megafauna went extinct during the Pleistocene. And as you all probably know, I think Dr. Ijiko even gave a talk in Ateneo about his find in Kalinga. His find is a very special one because he found an almost complete rhinoceros. And the speciality is that this one is butchered. So he even found stone tools and also cut marks on the bone. So it must have been a hominin activity by around 700,000 years ago in Luzon. And of course, this is from his study. So we can say that this one is the humerus of the rhinoceros, and this is also one of the stone tools, and it's very likely that the humerus got also crushed. And this is not very uncommon for early humans, because as we also like it today to eat, of course, bone marrow, it was actually also part of other hominins to crush bones to get access to bone marrow. It is actually a very specialty because bone marrow is very nutritious and it's not easy to access. There's actually only one animal, this is the spotted hyena, which has very, very heavy teeth animal. And because of this enamel, they can also crush bones and get access to the bone marrow, while other animals are not able to do that. Tigers and lions would have the biting force to crush bones, but if they do it, their teeth would wear down so quickly that they could not kill anymore or eat anymore. And this is why it's only possible for hyenas. So that means that for early humans, only these creatures were actually a competitor for bone marrow. And this bone crushing was actually also recorded for Homo habilis in the African continent, where species probably use these very easy chopping tools. And of course, this spread of humans or early hominins might have been even only possible because of this eating of meat and of course also bone marrow, because in this way they became very independent from the vegetation and could of course, because prey you can find actually almost everywhere. And it might be the key for humans to be able to leave the African continent. Of course, more indications of consumption of animals we can also find from Kalau Cave. I think you will also be all familiar with the very special find from Dr. Armand Mihares, who excavated, I think, since 2007 or even longer in Kalau Cave, and he found several bones belonging to a small hominin, a very tiny hominin. I think it's not yet that much that there's a reconstruction, but there are several teeth and foot and hand bones, which demonstrate that there must be a small hominin present about 67,000 years ago. And of course, studies on the deer bones, which were found with this Kalau man, also display some cut marks. You can see here very slight cut marks that is on a hand bone or forelimb bone of a deer. So that means they also were consuming animals. Unfortunately, stone tools were not found in that site. Maybe they were using other material, or the stone tools were not flushed into the cave, because I think the bone assemblage is flushed together into the cave. But we can at least see that there is also animal consumption present. And the reason why I'm introducing you to these two sites and the butchering is that we can see all over the world, in America, in Eurasia, in Africa, and even Australia, that there are megafaunal extinctions as soon as hominins or Homo sapiens arrived. And also we can see that a lot of predator species are also becoming extinct. And this, of course, can be explained by a variety of theories. There's also a theory about climate change. But of course, then we can also ask, why didn't smaller species die? Why is it the large species which become extinct? And the interesting part is that hominins or humans who can in fact hunt with weapons can also kill larger animals, for example, a rhinoceros. And of course, we don't know if the rhinoceros in Kalinga was killed or if they found a carcass, which is also a possibility. But in later periods, especially when Homo sapiens was present, we can say that hunting occurred and large species were killed. And usually large species like elephants, rhinoceros, and hippopotamus, they don't have a life cycle which is adapted that they lose their offspring to predators. It's very rare. I mean, tigers and lions also kill large animals, but it's very rare. It's not very common, because they can be killed if they go for an elephant calf. The mother is usually protecting the calf, and then the lion or the tiger will then be the victim instead of the prey. And this is why they are not really adapted to losing offspring or to losing even adult animals to prey and predation. And this is actually the basis of the theory that once humans, especially Homo sapiens, arrived, they actually started somehow an overkill or killed too many of these animals, and this leads to an extinction of them. But of course, before I finish the presentation, humans are not always bad or causing extinctions. We can say, of course, we were also responsible for distribution of animals. So, for example, the carabao that we have in the Philippines is actually not related to the tamarau. It was brought in, I think, two opposing theories, one from China and one from Malaysia. So it's actually related to the Asian water buffalo, or for example, the horse. I think this is also very common knowledge that probably the Spaniards were bringing it in. So we can see that, of course, we also support distribution of fauna, especially, of course, of the domestic one. But it can be that the extinctions that we see, they're in fact causing by the arrival of humans, or maybe even earlier hominins. So for the conclusion, I can say, of course, the Philippines were once inhabited by large megafauna, such as elephants, bigodons, and rhinoceros. And of course, newer theories say that they were probably a stepping stone for fauna into other Southeast Asian islands, and that hominins and humans might have caused the extinction of the megafauna in the Philippines. Of course, there are also other possibilities. As I said, climate change can also always cause extinctions, but probably hunting behavior, especially then later on with Homo sapiens, must have played a role in this extinction. Okay, so then I thank you for your attention, and I think I give now the word again to Dr. Pawlik.
Thank you very much, Rebekka. That was wonderful, a very inspiring lecture. And you showed us that there's so much potential in research on archaeology, on paleontology in the Philippines and in the entire region of island Southeast Asia. And in fact, it has become already a hotspot of research where many colleagues, many institutions are making incredible discoveries. You have mentioned two very recent, extremely important discoveries here in the Philippines, the Kalinga rhinoceros, Calao man, Homo luzonensis. So these are just discoveries that have been made in recent years. And it shows that there's most likely much more to come. So thank you very much for giving us this overview that puts a lot of background and context to those early hominins, our earliest ancestors that spread out and dispersed all across the world and even reached remote islands that were never connected to the mainland. And we still have to find out how they did it. But we can say that they did it eventually, and they have been there. I was very fascinated, of course, by the sweepstake route concept. And I don't know how likely this is. I would not really dare to be anywhere near a tsunami event and wait for being washed away to another island. But I remember it has also been considered as a possibility for the earliest hominins in the Philippines, the people who made the stone tools that were found together with the Kalinga rhinoceros, and that was more than 700,000 years ago. So this is quite some fascinating discovery, and there's certainly a lot more to research and a lot more to discover. And by the way, for everyone in the audience, Dr. Volmer has also mentioned the work of the excavators at Kalinga and the project that was headed by Dr. Tomás Inchico. Dr. Tomás Inchico will be talking in 2 weeks within the same webinar series. So we will see him on May 11. So please keep that date in mind. I can see that there are already several questions. So I will now turn over to my co-host, Mr. Aido Balboa, who will lead through the question and answers. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Pawlik. Questions for Dr. Volmer. This question is from Bernie G. Sagun from our Zoom chat box. He asks, is the Wallace line significant in the distribution of extinct fauna? Are these fossils that indicate that extinct megafauna have crossed the Wallace line?
Yeah, I mean the Wallace line and actually all the lines are based on the fauna that we can find actually today, and of course also the sea barriers that I was briefly discussing, saying okay, we had this barriers that sea crossing was necessary or is necessary to move into new areas. Of course, we can say that every new research can, of course, adjust or even modify, or in the worst case, reject some of the older concepts that we have. And I think especially the paleontology, as Dr. Pawlik already mentioned, there's so much potential still in the Philippines and Southeast Asia. There's so much understudied that just indicates that we need to do more research on this to justify or modify the old concepts that we have.
All right. We have another question from Janina Castro from the Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. She asks, when people, I think this is connected to the latter portion of your presentation, so you may opt to expound further if you wish to do so. When people arrived in the Philippines, how did this affect the ecology and species presence in the country, especially in the smaller islands?
Yeah, I mean, this is also one thing that we can say is still needs to be studied or is still understudied, because of course we can only say or base our concepts on the finds that we have and the things that we know. Of course, we can say when we have a smaller island or in general island faunas are more sensitive to new invasions, and especially if humans or Homo sapiens came for hunting, it can be of course a very challenging situation leading to extinctions in islands. It can be even or might be even beneficial if we had earlier species like 700,000 years ago. I mean, then Homo sapiens wasn't existing by that time. I mean, that must have been Homo erectus or another species of a hominin who butchered that rhino. The good thing can then be that the fauna is then, if the rhinoceros was hunted, we don't know that, was already adapted to predaceous species. And this can be beneficial because, for example, there are also islands like in Madagascar where that you have the dodo, which has no flight instincts to say, okay, I run away if there's a predator. And if this is the case, then the fauna is highly vulnerable. I don't think that was the case in the Philippine Islands. But of course, we have to study that more in detail. And there are also limitations. I mean, you cannot study it probably in that detail. What you can do, or what we actually aim for, is to see if we can find different ages of faunas, for example, older faunas and younger faunas, and then you can see if there's a change when Homo sapiens is arriving, or even when earlier hominins were arriving, and if there is an impact in the fauna.
Okay, I think we can cater to a few more questions. This one is connected to the earlier parts of your presentation, Dr. Volmer. Um, our participant asks, in what ways are Philippine fauna distinct from those found in other areas of the globe?
Yeah, it's also, first of all, very distinct because we have this endemic species. As I said, the Pseudoboceros, the pig, it's even a different species than the one in Sulawesi. The rhinoceros is also described as a separate species. Even the stegodon was, I think, assigned to a separate species, so there is a high endemism, meaning that the fauna was somehow separated. Otherwise, this endemism wouldn't develop. And of course, we can still see that we have the pigs and the deer today. They are also endemic, so they are very unique. They are not present anywhere else in the world. And of course, another point of this significance, as I mentioned, was that probably it was, or the Philippines were used as a stepping stone for fauna into Southeast Asian islands. So this is also a very specialty for Philippine fauna.
All right, and we have a fresh question from our Zoom chat box. It's from Sherwin Ramosa. He asks, in the case of the Philippine Eagle, what are your thoughts of its evolution or distribution? Why is it only found in the four islands, Luzon, Samar, Leyte, and Mindanao?
Oh, this is a bit of a challenge because I'm more into the mammals. That's why I was presenting mostly on mammals. Of course, I cannot say that much about the Philippine eagle. I just know that they are also very sensitive for habitats, or especially if they are a predaceous species. They need, of course, also enough prey, so they are usually less, or there is usually a smaller population possible in general, so they need a lot of prey as a population to be able to survive in general. So maybe this can affect it very highly, the presence and of course also the population size of the eagle.
All right, Dr. Pawlik, can we ask one more? How many more questions are we allowed to ask?
Oh, we still have time, so we can just continue for
All
a couple
right.
of more questions. Thanks.
Okay. There are two questions here that I think should be merged. You talked about the dispersal of Philippine fauna following a specific pattern. What might be the archaeo-environmental factors that have affected or are responsible for it? And I know you mentioned some, but non-experts, what do you think are the overlooked factors? Normal people, non-experts like me, often think are not factors, but in fact they are.
Yeah, I haven't understood the first part of the question. I just got the point that there were the factors influencing, but what was the first part of the question?
Okay, in what, sorry, I lost the question. Oh, did the dispersal of the Philippine fauna follow a specific pattern? That can be the first question.
Okay. Actually, you cannot really say a pattern. As I said, or what we usually use is this, that you can say the composition of the fauna is indicative of how it is shaped. And you cannot really say it's a typical remote island fauna as we can find in Flores, where we really have these poor species, number and species. We have very dwarf forms and the giant rat form. This is not the case for the Philippines, so there must be actually more of a filtered dispersal. As I said, that there was probably the possibility of swimming into the island. This is the only pattern we can see. Of course, then after that Pleistocene period, there must have been somehow an isolation. Otherwise, we wouldn't find the endemic species that we have today in the Philippines. This is so far what we can say about the pattern.
Okay, let's see. Perhaps I can ask this question our very own Dr. Alfred Pawlik. He asks, regarding the arrival of early hominins in Luzon more than 700,000 years ago, I remember from one of our earlier discussions that you said that, like any good predator, early humans probably also followed their prey even over long distances, if necessary. How can we picture that? Would you have an example?
Yeah, this if it's necessary is maybe the key. Of course, as I mentioned before, the dispersal versus expansion is sometimes a tricky process that yeah, it's hard to explain. But for example, yeah, if I sit in a very hot room and the next room has an air condition, then I have a motivation to say, oh well, I'm sweaty. I want to go over there because it's so cool there, and so I will move there voluntarily and willingly. But then, of course, we also have the thing that maybe I'm in a room and then there are coming 5 people in and another 5 people coming in, and then the room gets crowded and we have to expand into the next room, no matter if that is hot or cold or no matter if it's better or worse. And this is then expansion, and usually you find somehow yeah a mix of these processes, because yeah, maybe we move into the next room because of expansion, but then we find it's not so nice there, and then we are voluntarily looking for another place to be. And I think this is somehow also with this following of the prey. I think it's possible, or it's enabling humans or hominins to move into a lot of variety of habitats and areas, to say, okay, I'm not depending on the vegetation because prey is actually everywhere. So as long as I can hunt animals, I will have something to eat. And of course, there are also factors like fire or using the fur, which can play a role, especially by moving into cold areas. So we cannot directly say that they were following prey, but it can also be the case because, for example, in case of the deer, we know that they sometimes swim to other islands just because they are looking for food. Maybe hominins were doing something similar. If the food was scarce, yeah, maybe they were even trying to cross sea to find a better place to be.
Okay. Finally, I think we have time for one last question, and I think it's a very relevant. It's from one of our registrants. It's a simple question, I think, but you may expound further. In these times, how can Philippine fauna become a victim of extinction? What are the solution to its problems, to that problem?
Yeah, I think one of the main problems that we have worldwide with extinction of fauna is, of course, that the human population is growing, and as a population needs food, we have to use the land to better use our resources. And of course, when you start to use land for something, then there are always species who will die from that or will not have the possibility to inhabit this space. And of course, this has always an impact then on fauna and extinction. So there is sad but true not that much that we can actually do. I think we have to accept it on a certain level that there will be some species who will become extinct. Of course, there are still possibilities to keep populations in protected areas, and there are a lot of still protected areas in the Philippines. And I think this is something that if you want to protect species, you can work on, that you somehow also monitor populations, like I think with the tamarau or the Visayan spotted deer, it's done that you try as much as possible also to avoid inbreeding, to keep them in these habitats. which will be then undisturbed and to protect the species. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Volmer. I will now turn the webinar over to Dr. Alfred Pawlik.
Okay, thank you very much, Aido, and thank you, Rebekka, for answering very well the questions that we had, and they were across the board. Thank you also for responding to my own question and for the wonderful example. Of course, now in end of April with all the heat here, I really can relate to the air-conditioned room example, and that helps me to understand this problem very well. Okay, so we are now right on time at the end of our webinar. Thank you again, Dr. Rebekka Volmer, for your wonderful presentation and for being able for us and give this very nice talk. Thanks to Aido for helping in this webinar and for taking care of the question and answer section. Thanks to all our participants. Thank you for coming. Before we end, let me announce that our speaker in next week's webinar will be Dr. Miriam Heidle from the Heidelberg Academy of Sciences and the University of Tübingen in Germany. And she will talk about the dawn of culture, sociality, thinking in loops, and an extended resource space. So again, on a Thursday, May 6 at 2 p.m. Manila time. Thank you very much for coming. Have a good day and take care. Stay safe, everyone. Goodbye.